Paul pulls Georgie from the couch and slips a pillowcase over the boy's head. He then demands George to tell and to strip, insisting it will prove she has a toned body. The film opens with a wealthy family en route to their vacation home. Inside the car, Ann and George play a guessing game with classical music playing through the speakers. Their light mood dims as they stop in front of the Thompsons' house, where Steve stands outside with two unfamiliar men. Paul, one of them, teases them from the car window for practicing golf before tomorrow's match. The Thompsons remain silent. Steve eventually responds and invites George to help prepare the boat, though Fred seems reluctant. As they drive off, George notices the neighbors acting strangely. Georgie asks about Jenny Thompson, who isn't outside, assuming she must be elsewhere. They finally arrive at their summer house. Georgie runs in with Lucky, their dog. George carries in the golf clubs and asks and to grab the meat from the car. Lucky barks outside loudly at Paul, who stands behind the gate with Fred. George apologizes for the noise, but Fred waves it off and introduces Paul as the son of a business partner, and greets Fred with a kiss. The boys go to the bay to push the boat while Fred leaves the rest to George and Georgie. Georgie is upset about Jenny's absence and George suggests she might be at a friend's, and prepares dinner while chatting on the phone. Georgie asks for a knife and promises to return it but doesn't. He soon announces someone's at the door. George meets Steve, who introduces himself as a guest of the Thompsons. Steve is oddly formal and admits he entered through the fence, technically trespassing. He asks for eggs and gives him some, but he drops them and apologizes, and is polite but clearly uneasy. She offers more eggs, this time in a carton. Meanwhile, Steve accidentally drops Ann's phone in water while pretending to be clumsy. Lucky continues barking at the strangers, sensing something's off. Despite the red flags, George allows the men inside. Paul surveys the house, eyeing the golf clubs, and asks to try one. Lucky's behavior unsettles Steve, and should have asserted her authority and told them to leave. Out on the boat, Georgie hears Lucky's barks fade into silence, then a final yelp. George goes looking for the dog, and, now suspicious, demands Paul and Steve leave. Paul gaslights her, questioning her sudden change in tone. George returns with Georgie just as Paul spins a false story. George, the ever-passive husband, fails to kick them out. Paul demands eggs again. George refuses, slaps Paul, and tells them to go. Steve reacts violently, smashing George's knee with a golf club. George collapses. Georgie lunges at Steve but is overpowered. Paul lays the boy beside George and tells him to behave, and enters and sees George in agony. Paul claims George deserved it. Thus begins their nightmare funny games. Paul rolls a golf ball across the floor and asks the family to guess why he still has it. Steve realizes it's because Paul never used it, he used the golf club instead to kill Lucky. They force Ann to search for the dog using hot or cold hints. Behind the van, she finds Lucky's mangled body. Ann's friends, Betsy and Robert, visit with their boat. She tries to act normal under Paul's gaze. After they leave, Ann bluffs about more guests arriving. George, in pain, relies on her. Steve rambles about communication while they're held hostage by sadistic strangers. Paul lays George on the couch and sends Ann to get medicine. While she's gone, he apologizes for their behavior and reintroduces themselves. Steve offers a handshake just as Ann returns. Paul is enraged at the interruption, pushes Ann into George's wound. George cries out. Steve kicks George's knee again. Paul punches Ann in the stomach, then shoves her beside George. Georgie cries, only to be pinned down by Paul. Fear silences the room. George asks their motive. Paul explains they're drug addicts who rob wealthy vacationers. George offers them money in exchange for their lives. Paul mocks him and suggests a bet: they die in 12 hours or survive till morning. Paul begins the next game, cat in the bag. He bags Georgie's head again and tells George to make Ann strip. If she refuses, Georgie gets choked. Tearfully, Ann removes her clothes, humiliated. Paul is satisfied and allows her to dress again. But Georgie urinates on Paul. Enraged, Paul removes the bag, giving Georgie a chance to escape. Ann is tied up. Georgie slips through the fence toward Jenny's place. He hides in the Thompsons' open home. Steve, meanwhile, expresses regret about begging for eggs and reminisces about humiliation. He returns to catch and trying to escape and pushes her down. The eggs he carries fall to the ground again. Ann pleads, offering to lie, saying he's young and has a future. Steve ignores her. Upstairs, Georgie ditches his wet clothes to avoid a trail. He finds a shotgun and Jenny's corpse. Choking back tears, he grabs the weapon. Paul soon finds him and urges him to shoot. But Georgie realizes it's unloaded and sits frozen with grief. Georgie returns and reports Jenny's death. Paul mocks him and thanks him for a new weapon. He grabs food while the family cries off-screen. A gunshot rings out. Steve is dead. Paul enters furious. He yells at Anne for breaking the rules and grabs a remote. Rewinds time. Back at the moment and tries to shoot. Paul stops her and shoots George instead. The film ends with Anne gagged and trapped on her own boat. Paul and Steve sail to Betsy's home. On the way, Steve babbles about dimensional theories and uses the same knife Betsy lent them earlier, and tries to cut herself free, but Paul notices. Steve tosses the knife into the water. Paul kisses Anne's forehead and pushes her into the lake. They arrive at their next destination. Betsy answers the door. Paul smiles at the camera, about to begin again. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this. Have a great day.